Hello, my name's Julie. I'm from the Spellbound Bead Company, and what I'm trying to encourage you to do today is to love your leftovers. All those little bits and pieces of beads that have been lurking at the back of your cupboard that you bought for projects, and they might be leftovers, they might be bits that never actually fitted into the project at all. Now I'm using seed beads to make these little circular targets or circular motifs that help bring the colours together, and then we've slotted in some plain beads that go with the colour mix. Now these are some I've got left over from making this, so I've obviously got some more towards another project, and I may well use the same technique again to make a matching necklace. So these are the oddments I've brought together to make my project. I've got 6 size 8 seed beads, but you could have more, you could have less. I've got 8 size 10 seed beads, but these could be size 11 seed beads, or they could be a mixture of 10 and 11. And I've got some larger sort of fancy or plain beads that work with my colour selection. Now this is what actually set off the project. This is a lime green Rivoli that I put a bezel round so long ago I can't remember what it was for, but it obviously wasn't used. So it's got this lovely lime green and pink around the edge, so that set me off looking for lime green and for different pinks. I've put a little bit of white with it just to lift, and I've got a little bit of yellow and a little bit of lilac and a little bit of turquoise just to bring everything together. And I've rooted out some similar beads to give a little bit of interest in between the little targets I'm going to make. Now some of these beads are flat, some of them are round. I've actually got a couple of candy beads in here, which are the double hole beads, but that's not essential. The important thing is you've got a selection of beads that work well together and beads that you like. Right, I'm going to clear the decks a little bit so I can show you how to make one of our little target motifs, which is going to bring the whole theme together. Now I've prepared my needle with a length of size D beading thread. Now I'm using a pale pink because it sort of tones with everything without clashing too much and without showing too strongly against the white. And I've got about 1.20 meters here because I'm going to make a circle, make a target rather. Then I'm going to cut it off and I'll have enough thread left to do a second target. Now I've chosen 3 colours for my first little target disc. I'm going to use lime, turquoise and white. And you can see I've got 2 size 10s or 2 size 11s and a size 8. I'm going to start with 10 size 10, and I think I'll put green on the inside. So here we go. I've got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now you can use a keeper bead if you want, but I prefer, as I'm making a circle, not to use a keeper bead because the thread's anchored almost straight away. Now I'm going to start about 25 centimeters from the tail end of the thread, and I'm going to pass through all the beads again. So I've got a circle about 25 centimeters from the end of the thread. So I've passed through all the beads one more time, that makes a circle. And to make the circle neat, if you just pass through one more, that brings bead 1 up against bead 10 and makes a really neat circle. Right, now the next row is done in size 8, so I'm going to be using the turquoise. I'm going to need 15 of these beads. and we build the rows in square stitch. So I'm going to start with a single square stitch, so it's the size 8 on, through the size 10 on the ring in the same direction, and then back through the size 8. So we've got our square thread path, we've got the holes in the 2 beads parallel. Now the start of square stitch always reverses the direction of the work, so I'm going to flip that over so I'm working away from myself again, and the next stitch is an increase stitch. Oops. So I'm going to need 2 seed beads, 2 the size 8. I go back towards the previous stitch through the size 10 on the previous row and forward through the new 2 beads. This is just a little bit awkward for the first one because it's all a bit wobbly. Once we get going, it's much easier. And now we revert to a single bead. So it's 1 size 8 on, back through the next bead along the previous row and forwards through the new one, and then we do an increase stitch. So it's on with 2, back through the next bead on the previous row, forward through the new 2. So you can see how easy this is. And a single one, and then we're going to do an increase again. It's already feeling firmer and I've got much more to hold, so it grows quite quickly. I find square stitch very relaxing because it makes nice neat lines. So I've done 1 2 1 2 1 2, and I've got a 1 and a 2 to finish off the row in that gap there. So 2 beads on, back through the last one of the previous row and forwards through the 2 I've just put on, plus I'm going to go through the next few beads along, and that makes my circle. So very simple square stitch, a single stitch followed by a double stitch. I'm going to go through all of these beads again to make sure that the circle is nice and firm. I can tell when I'm back all the way around because that's the tail end, that's where I started. So a couple more beads, and that means that the circle has been reinforced at least one time all the way around. Now I'm going to add the second row, the second row of size 10s, which goes on the outside of the size 8. So we've got 10s, 8s, now we're going to do 10s. And this is all square stitch and it's all increased stitches, so it's 2 beads at a time. So it's through 1 bead on the previous row and back through the new 2. As you can see, the direction of work is reversed again, so flip it over, and that makes it easier to work. 2 beads on, back through 1, forward through 2. That first stitch always seems to catch the next stitch along, so just look out for that. There we go. Now I'm doing little discs or targets for this project, but equally you could make little right angle weave squares perhaps, or you could make little triangles using square stitch. But if you keep all to the same shape through the project, and it doesn't matter how disparate your colours are, it somehow works. So keeping to circles brings all these toning but quite different colours together quite successfully. You see I'm nearly round, not too much to go now. So each target takes 10 size 10 seed beads for the middle row. It takes 15 size 8s for the next row, and it takes 30 size 10 for the outside row, so size 10 or size 11. So you can see it's not many beads, and if all you've got is a tiny bit of lots and lots of different colours, this works equally well in all the colours under the rainbow. So you could just make one circle in 3 colours that you can't use in anything else. There we go. So we're all the way around. Pass through the first few beads again. You can see I've got my 3 rows now, but I want to neaten it, so I'm going to go all the way around this outer row, and depending on the exact match of your size 8s with your size 10s or your size 11s, you'll probably find that this outer row is a little bit smaller than the exact circumference of your size 8s, the size 8 rows. So when we get all the way around and give the thread a good pull, so just pull it up nice and neat, you'll find that you get a slight dome in your disc, which neatens it quite nicely. Now we're going to have lots of thread ends on this, so we want to finish off as much as we can as we go along. Now I'm going to finish off the sewing thread end because I want the rest of this thread to make the next motif. So I'm going to bring it down to my tail end, so work it back down so we're in the corresponding gap. I'm just going to tie them together with a double knot. The gaps between the beads are quite generous, so the knot disappears quite easily. And I'm going to neaten the sewing end by passing through a few beads before I trim it off. There we go. Trim that off. And I'm going to leave the long tail end attached because that's what I'll use for linking this target to the next component. Now you need to make quite a few of these, depending on how long you want to make your bracelet or your necklace, and you want to assort the colours as much as possible. So I've got, you can see there's lots of thread ends here. You can see I've got lots of different combinations, but in each case in this particular design I've tried to use either lime or white in each combination. This one's just got white, this one's just got lime, this one's got the lime and the white, but it helps to bring everything together. Now in addition to my 3-row ones, I've also made some 2-row ones, and these will help to accommodate the extra feature beads that I showed you previously, because being a little bit smaller, when we link them together it leaves a little space, and that means we can join in one of our spare beads from the rest of our bead mix. So I'm going to go away and make a few more of these, and I'll be back to you when I've got a plan of how I'm going to stitch them together. So as you can see, I've been quite busy. I've made quite a few of these little target circles. The majority of them have got 3 rows, so I've got size 10, size 8, size 10, or you may well be using 11s. And I've made a few of the smaller ones with just the 2 rows on. So it's just the inner row of 10s and the middle row of 8s. Now I've used a little trick that a friend taught me many years ago, and I have taken a piece of paper and cut a strip that's the right length for my wrist, but approximately the same width that I want to make my design. This gives me a rough outline as to where to lay out all my bits and pieces. Now I started in the middle with the Rivoli because it's the biggest thing I had, and I've placed everything out with little extra beads in between to make some of the connections. Now everything is touching at the moment, but I know that this is going to change. When I actually come to physically link them together, it never works out exactly how you want it to be. There'll be some joints that are too difficult to make, some that are a little bit wobbly so they need support, and for various reasons like that, things will need to change a little bit, although I intend to keep the basic plan the same. So to make allowances for the differences, I've got some extra rings in different sizes just in case I need to do a swap out, and I've also got a few odd seed beads left from making the discs, and I might need to use those just as extra spacers or to add flexibility if it's becoming a little bit stiff. Now I've laid this out, that's my intended pattern, and I've taken a photograph of it and I've printed it out so that I've got a reference, because as soon as I start picking up things I'm going to lose my pattern. So there's my little snap that you can take on your phone, or I've printed it out because it's easier for me when I'm demonstrating. And now I'm going to start joining everything together. So I'll get ready to do that and I'll be straight back. Now I'm going to start with the Rivoli in the centre. Now it didn't happen to have a thread attached to it, so I've joined on a thread and finished off the end neatly so the additional thread end doesn't get in the way. Now I'm going to make my first join to the first disc it actually touches, which is this green and pink one here. And I'm just going to do all the links with square stitches. I'm going to pick up the Rivoli, pick up the disc, and you can see I've got size 10 beads and delicas coming together here, so they don't match absolutely precisely, but they're close enough. So I'm going to do a little square stitch. Now I'm using a size 10 needle here. I know it should go through these beads, these delicate beads on the edge of the Rivoli, but if you're using other things you need to stitch to, you might have to go down a size in needle, because you want to make sure these stitches are really strong. So because this is peyote, the beads are offset and I want this to lie flat, so I'm going to select the beads I link to carefully and do 2 layers of stitches just to make sure it's firmly attached, because this is going to be the heaviest component in the design as well. So I've just made a couple of square stitches, so I've gone through the bead on the Rivoli, or the bezel around the Rivoli, and the opposite way through the seed bead on the edge of the disc, and that gives me a really strong bond. So each stitch, the square stitch, the thread path makes that square to make the join. Right, let's pop that down. So far I've managed to stick to the pattern, which is not always the case. Now we can see here the next join, I've got a little pink disc here and I've got a yellow disc here. Now I've push that little flower in there so the pink disc isn't actually touching that green disc. Now, I'm pretty sure I can make that work. I might have to put a little bridge in there with one of my seed beads, but I'll see when I join this one on here. But first things first, I'm going to join the pink disc to the Rivoli setting, and I'm also going to join the yellow disc onto the Rivoli setting. Now let's have a look where my thread is. Right, it happens to be coming this way, so let's have a little look. I need to come 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 beads around the Rivoli setting, and then I can join on to this one. I'm just going to work my way through. So that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Let's double check. Yep, that's about right. And now I can link this one to this one. And that is Indy, who's barking, so my apologies for that. But she's a new little puppy, and she likes the sound of her own voice, I'm afraid. Right, now I'm joining in size 8 to a Delica, and that is a definite mismatch in size, so I'm actually going to join one size 8 to 2 Delica beads, so I'll pass through 2. And this is all you're doing, is you're making allowances so you can make the joins as firm as possible. So I've made a stitch through that one and that one, so I'm now going to go through that one and that one. That makes it a little bit more substantial. There we go. Let's pop that back down again. And you can see already, now they're joining together, my intended pattern is distorting slightly because things are shrinking. So let's have a look at where that one was going to be. I check back to my paper pattern, and I've got, and you see on the paper pattern I'd already disturbed it, because on the paper pattern that pink disc was joined to that one, and this bead here was making the intermediate link. So let's see if we can do that. Now, this little pink bead up here is actually a candy bead. It's got 2 holes in it. So I can utilise that to help me make the link. But first of all, I need to work out how far round. So let's look, we've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, probably 13 this time. It's all just a matter of doing a little bit and checking back, and it should be an enjoyable process. It shouldn't be stressful. Now I'm hoping to make another couple of links with this piece of thread, because I joined it on to the Rivoli specifically to make several joins, but when you're just linking further on, when you've run out of this thread, you've got a tail attached to each disc, so you can just use this tail to make the next link along, and you finish off your ends as you go. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Need to go another couple of beads and see where I am. That's about right. So I'm going to take it from the candy bead to this one. So candy bead through one hole only, and then I need that little disc. We're going to join it to here and to here, so I'm going to join on to the candy bead first. So I'm going to take 2 beads on the edge here, I'm going to go back through the disc bead and pick up a delica on this end, and I'm going to repeat that to make a nice firm join. Now I want some flexibility here because I want this one to come down to here, so I've got to be careful which delicas I actually join onto. Now at the moment I'm joined onto this one here, and I want to pick up another bead to make sure that it's a firm bond. Now if I bring that round to there, you can see the candy bead leans over, so if I take the next delica along in this direction to make the next stitch, that is bending the work the way I want it to go. And it's all about being flexible. So let's move round to where we want this one to join this one. Pop them down and we can see we need to go another 4 beads. Two, 4. Pop that down again. There's a little bit of tension in that, but I don't mind that tension because that helps to hold everything nice and firm. Now I need to identify which bead I'm going to join onto, and it's this one here. So I'm going to just stab next to it with my needle while I pick it up, and it's another square stitch, so it's that thread end. Here I'm just joining 1 bead to 2 beads and see how that looks, because this little pink circle isn't so circular anymore, so I'm going to go with it as a slightly wonky circle. That's it, so that's attached. Right, I'm going to do a few more links and then I'll be back to you and show you how it's progressing. I'm going to move out this way first, so I'm going to leave this needle thread. I'm going to pick up the thread on this disc here, and I'm going to join on a few things and show you how it's progressing. Now I've come back to you a little bit sooner than I expected because I've got one of these little areas here where 2 things won't quite come together. If I move that out of the way, you can see on my plan here, there's the Rivoli, and I've got a candy bead and a green bead and this disc here. And I've got the green bead, Rivoli, the disc and the candy bead, and there's a gap. So I need to make up this gap with something else. Now I could put another small bead in, and I'm considering that, or I could use a little bridge of seed beads, and because it's a 4mm hole I'm tempted to use the pearl bead, but I need to see where the hole in the candy bead is. So it's actually just here, so I think a seed bead in this case will do. So I go up through there and make sure that doesn't pull the work too far out of the pattern of the width that I wanted, and I think that's about right. Now because it's a candy bead, this hole is floating in free space, so I'm going to have to come back down through here, take a stitch through the Rivoli and back the same way. So there's nothing mysterious or clever about it, it's just finding a path means you can make the join. I'm going to join that to 2 seed beads rather than just one on the edge of this disc, because that's stronger. There we go. Let's have a little look at that. And that works just fine. Now if I bring up my pattern now, I can see I've done these ones here, and the next one is going to be a large pink one that will link to this turquoise one. So it's this large pink one that will link to the turquoise, and because it's rolled out the way, that one is supposed to make a bridge between here and here. So I'll make one straight big stitch between these two through this bead, and then I'll link this one on, and I'll try and avoid having to use too many more bridges. I'll be back to you when I've progressed a bit further. Right, I've actually finished the construction of this end of the bracelet design. I've linked them together, as you can see, but I have had to make a few adaptations because things didn't fit exactly as I wanted, especially as I came towards the end. You can see, although that one is still in the same place, this one's moved down a bit, this one has moved out a bit. It's just to make sure that I can get the bonds as neat and as strong as possible. I've also had to add in a few single seed beads just to help with the joins. So here, just because this round candy bead, it's linked here and here through one hole, but here and here there was too big a gap for the thread to stretch across, so little seed beads in there, a little one there just to strengthen that bond because this is where the clasp is going to be. And here I'd got quite a big heavy bead, so I've put in an extra pearl there just to help to support that. Right, so now I've got to work out to the other side. Now the first couple of items that I've planned to put there is a donut bead, a candy bead, and 2 of our targets. Now the donut bead, I'm going to have to put a strap of seed beads around and through the hole, and I'm going to have to do it out to the other side here as well. I'm also going to have to go that way and that way. Now I know that that hole there is only big enough really for 1 seed bead in the middle. So I'm going to put 1 seed bead in the middle, and all of these straps will pass through that single seed bead. That's the plan at the moment anyway. I'll be back to you once I've assembled it and you can see whether I've succeeded or not. Right, so as you can see, I've been a busy little bee and I have stitched the rest of the band together. You can see the straps of seed beads there around the donut, and I think that's held it quite successfully, mainly because the colour of these seed beads blends in so well with the donut. Now it's just the right size for my wrist, which is the length of my paper, and I've stayed within the width that I set earlier, a little bit over in places, but I've had to make a few little adjustments. I've got a size 6 seed bead in there, and that pearl which was going to be there is now here, and I've not put the little pink flower on the end because I now need to decide how I'm going to add my clasp. Now my first thought was to use a sliding magnetic clasp with several loops on that I could just attach behind the discs at either end, but unfortunately this one hasn't ended up absolutely square. So I've had a little think and I've decided I'm going to put a bead and loop clasp on. In fact, I'm going to put 2 beads and loops on. So that one is going to go, let me just move that. This one, I've got a nice turquoise flower is going to go there, a pink flower there, and I'll make loops at this end, or I might swap them and do them that way around, put the loops on. I'm going to have a little experiment and show you what I've come up with. So I've made 2 simple beaded loops at this end of the length. Now this is the end that was slightly more even, and I've made the loops the right size for the 2 clasp beads. So this little pink bead fits through this one, and that little disc bead fits through that one. Now as you can see, very fortuitously the ends of the loops line up. So that means I've got to get at this end these 2 fastener beads to line up, and then when everything is brought together, the bracelet will join up evenly. Now as you can see, when I line up these 2 beads, they are not particularly well connected just here. So I'm going to put in an extra feature bead which marries in with the rest of the design, and then instead of having a string of seed beads, I've got an extra bead which brings it into the rest of the pattern. So I'm going to need a seed bead or 2, and I'm going with the random but planned sequence we've done so far. Now that's actually too long, so I'm going to take out that pink seed bead. Oops, around there. And yes, I did pass the needle back point first to undo something, but I did actually know there was only one bead I was taking off. So there we go, that's that one back on. And now I've got my fastener bead. Now these have got quite big holes, so I'm actually going to put a size 8 either side. Check it's level. That's going to work. So when that comes round, they will marry up. I just need a stopper bead, and let's use a pink one. So back down everything apart from the first seed bead. That's the pink bead pulled up as an anchor. Now I want this tag to attach to at least 2 beads on here, so I'm going to pick up another seed bead and pass through 2 seed beads towards the previous base, and that spreads this stick over those 2 beads on the end. So it's going to be up and down a couple of times to make sure everything's nice and firm, because the clasp, as we all know, is the bit that gets the hardest wear and tear. So if you can pass through a 3rd time or a 4th time, so much the better. Now I came up the white one, so I've got to go down the green one. Through these 2. And I'll take the needle up and down another couple of times if it will work. But as you can see, that's our bracelet complete. Now I'll just pop it on my wrist, and you can see that's a really nice way to use up all your odds and ends. Now I've used sort of carnival colours because that's what I happened to have on my desk at the time, but I think it would work equally well in any combination of beads or a combination of any beads. It's the little extra bits that make all the difference, that bring it to life. So although these take the time to make, it's these little links that will bring the whole thing into a designer category rather than just a bracelet. I hope you've enjoyed watching. We've got several more of these types of videos in the series, so come and love your leftovers with Spellbound again. Thank you very much. Bye bye.